Assalamu alaikum. How is the voice for you all? Let me just see
Walaikum
if,
salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You seem to sound fine. Alhamdulillah.
all right, let me just make sure that this is using the headset. Yes, it appears that it is using the headset. Okay, if the voice becomes unclear, please just let me know, inshallah. طيب, Bismillah. Screen. طيب. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما نافعا وعملا صالحا متقبلا وزدنا من فضلك حكمة وتعليما خالصا لوجهك موفقا. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت يا حي يا قيوم تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا سهلا. طيب. I'd like to welcome you all. Let me see if there's anyone here I don't know. Let's take a look at the participants. Okay, I think the only person that I'm no, actually, I think I know all of you, inshallah. Right. Without further ado, we're going to talk today about, I'll say something about myself just in case you don't know me, about the course, about the book, the author of the book, and mainly about, or a bit about balagha. And mainly, we're going to talk about the general concepts of bayan. So the goal of this class, at the very least, is to come out knowing the idea of the four devices of al-Bayan, of this lesson in particular, to come out knowing the four devices of al-Bayan, and to understand where bayan fits with respect to balagha, and to know a bit about the book that we're studying and why we're studying it. And for example, someone might ask why we're not studying a matan. And in general, some ideas, in addition to those four devices, you should also come out of this class with a general idea of what majaz and haqiqa mean, and basically be able to prepare yourself for upcoming classes, inshallah. Right. So without further ado, so about myself, my name is Moustafa Elqabbany. I live in Amman, Jordan. I'm Canadian of Egyptian origin. I work as a translator, a researcher, and a programmer sometimes as well. About the course. Let's talk about the course and the course material. So the course material is Ilm al-Bayan, right? And so Ilm al-Bayan is a part of balagha. It's one of the three disciplines of balagha, but in particular, Ilm al-Bayan is concerned with is concerned with the discussion of figurative language in classical Arabic. So the entire discussion of Ilm al-Bayan only has to do with figurative language, and so it doesn't have to do with literal language in the way that we use literal and figurative in modern English, and also even to an extent the way that we understand majaz and haqiqa in modern standard Arabic. And so there's if we're discussing haqiqa and majaz in this chapter, then it behooves us to ask why that's even relative. Why that's even relevant, pardon me. Why is it even relevant to talk about haqiqa and majaz in a chapter that is entirely concerned with figurative language? And the reason is because haqiqa and majaz in Arabic do not translate exactly to literal and figurative. And it's funny watching, Muslims who have differences in understandings of aqidah speak past each other, because at a fundamental level, what they're literally talking about is an issue of semantics, a semantic model. And so the entire subject matter of bayan is figurative language, how you say things figuratively, right? Not literally. And yet we're going to get into a discussion of what is haqiqa and what is majaz, because two of the devices are haqiqa. So tashbih and kinaya are considered haqiqa, whereas isti'ara and majaz mursal are considered majaz. And so how can you have haqiqa when obviously it's not literal? Well, it's because the meaning of haqiqa isn't the exact same thing as the meaning of literal, okay? And so if we take an example of the tashbih or comparison, we could say Zaydun kal asadi. Here you see that you have what we call a mushabbah, which is what's called in English the tenor. And kal asadi, the mushabbah bihi is the lion, and that's called the vehicle. So you see here that we have Zaydun kal asadi. We have a tenor and we have a vehicle. We're comparing Zayd to a lion, and we have the adatu tashbih, which is the kaf. In other words, the operator that does the actual tashbih, that does the actual comparison, and that's the kaf here. Zayd is like a lion, or we could just say Zaydun asadun, which would also be tashbih in Arabic, right? And so what you see in both of these cases is that you have a mushabbah and you have a mushabbah bihi, right? And if we were to look at this ayah, now we're going to move, from something very simple. So you get the concept. Is anyone unclear on the concept of a tashbih? A tashbih would be in English approximately either a simile or a metaphor. But I'm not going to commit to any particular translation of these terms, because I believe that there are subtleties in Arabic and in English that won't be captured by the other. So a tashbih is approximately a metaphor or a simile. So Zaydun kal asad, Zayd is like a lion, would be considered a simile in English, whereas Zayd is a lion would be considered a metaphor in English. In Arabic, so in English, the difference between a simile and a metaphor is based on whether the adatu tashbih, whether the thing that is comparing two things to each other. So a comparison, would it be just better to say comparison? Comparison is the my suggestion would be to reserve comparison for the relationship between them, which would be mushabaha, or if you were to translate the tashbih as comparison, yes, from shubha and shabiha, which means to resemble something, right? Shabah. And the shib, and the difference between shabah and the shib is like the difference between a methal and a mithal, right? And so one is a concept, and the other is something that has that actually is comparable to something else. So the question is, if you're to say that tashbih is comparison, what would you call mushabaha? So I need two different words. In any case, you're free to answer that here in the Telegram group. You can think about it however you like. So the first type of figurative device in Arabic is a tashbih. So when we say Zaydun kal asadi or Zaydun asadun, what you have here in both the first would be the example of a simile in English, and the second would be a metaphor. In Arabic, both are called tashbih, because in Arabic, whether the comparison operator is mentioned or not, the adat tashbih, whether that is mentioned or not, or comparative operator, perhaps we could call it, whether it's mentioned or not, it is still considered a tashbih as long as the tenor and the vehicle are both mentioned. If we say that Zaydun asadun or Zaydun kal asadi, those are both tashbih, right? Because I've mentioned the mushabbah and the mushabbah bihi. But on the other hand, if I say something like yaz'uru Zaydun, that Zayd roars or Zayd growls, in that case, I'm not mentioning the actual. I'm not mentioning the actual. I'm not mentioning the actual mushabbah bihi. Am I? I'm mentioning I'm mentioning the mushabbah, which is Zayd, but I'm not mentioning the mushabbah bihi, in which case this is the vehicle is actually omitted, and what we're mentioning is something in place of it, which is the roaring, right? And so the difference between a tashbih and an isti'ara is actually, they're similar in a fundamental way, in that they're both based on comparison of one thing to another thing. Zayd is like a lion. The religion of Allah is like a sirat al-mustaqim. The religion of Allah is like al-habl, right? وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ. That would be an example of an isti'ara. There's a comparison of the religion of Allah to a rope. Okay, so what is so both the tashbih and the isti'ara are similar from the perspective that the relationship between the uttered meaning and the intended meaning is one of comparison, is one of mushabaha. They're related in that way. But they are different in that the tashbih establishes this comparison. It establishes the relationship. The isti'ara goes much deeper. It doesn't establish the relationship. Rather, it assumes that the relationship is such a given that I don't even need to say that Zayd is like a lion or Zayd is a lion. I just say Zayd roars and you understand that he's a lion. So an isti'ara assumes an existing relationship. Tashbih builds that relationship, okay? But they're both based on what? They're both based on mushabaha or a comparison, right? That is their alaqa. So whenever you have any figurative device in Arabic, okay, there's always something which is the uttered meaning, and then, the uttered words, okay, and then there's the intended meaning. Okay, so you have the uttered expression and the intended meaning. What takes you from the uttered expression to the intended meaning? We're going to get into that. That's called the alaqa, right? What takes you from one to the other is the alaqa, right? In the case of Zayd is a lion or Zayd is like a lion, there's a alaqa of mushabaha, and that alaqa is being stated outright. Okay, there's a alaqa of comparison, and that alaqa or that relationship between them is being stated outright. Zayd is a lion or Zayd is like a lion. That is a type of relationship that's called a comparison, and it's being stated outright. In the case of an isti'ara, the alaqa is still
Your voice has been cut off, Saidi.
based on tashbih.
Sorry, you cut off for everybody for like
we lost
15
you for a
seconds.
bit, yeah.
Alrighty, pardon me. Okay. What is the last thing? Is my voice fine now?
Yeah.
And what is the last thing you heard?
So we were talking about how the alaqa is the link that takes you from the uttered meaning to the intended meaning, and then you were
All right,
expanding on
perfect.
that. Yeah.
All right, perfect. So the alaqa is the relationship between the uttered words and the intended meaning. Okay, and that exists in every single one of these. In every single one of these four devices, you have alaqa. In the case of tashbih, the alaqa is mushabaha, is a comparison. In the case of isti'ara, it's the same thing. But why is tashbih, as we're going to learn, referred to as a haqiqa, whereas isti'ara is considered majaz? Because in tashbih, you are literally stating that relationship up front. And because Zayd is not literally a lion, okay, because these two things exist from two different classes, you're establishing a new relationship. And because you're establishing a new relationship, it's a haqiqah, because you're saying, look, I'm going to compare Zayd to a lion, is what you're saying when you say Zaydun Asadun. You don't literally mean that Zayd is a lion. And so this is considered a haqiqah because it's considered that you are establishing that relationship right there, right? And the relationship is mushabaha. In the case of isti'ara, we move beyond that. We assume that mushabaha already exists in the person's mind, and I can build upon that, and I can say Zaid roars. Okay, I can say Zaid roars. Okay, and so that's the idea of the isti'ara versus the tashbih. That both of them are based on comparing two things of different classes to each other. However, the tashbih mentions that comparison explicitly. It mentions the tenor, it mentions the vehicle. They're not from the same class, and so therefore it's interpreted as establishing a relationship of unlike objects with each other. And because it's establishing a relationship of unlike objects with each other, then it's considered a haqiqah because it's stating that relationship up front. The isti'ara is based on the same relationship, but it doesn't state it up front. It rather assumes it, and so therefore it is a type of majaz. Because when I say yaz'aru Zaydun, right? I'm not saying that Zayd is like a lion. I'm just saying he's roaring. And because I haven't stated the mushabaha, the alaqa up front, and just assumed it, it becomes a type of majaz, right? How do we translate majaz in English? It's a good one. How would you translate majaz in English? So this is we're going to study what majaz means, and hopefully, you know what I really honestly think is that majaz should be written in italicized English letters and then footnoted and defined, as opposed to just translating it as figurative speech, because a number of people, including modern Arabs, when they speak about majaz, they would consider everything in this bab majaz, right? And so majaz in modern standard Arabic, and it seems like it according to some of our Salafi brothers, and as well as figurative speech in English, are all similar. Majaz, as per classical Arabic bayan, which is what we're studying here, is a bit different. Okay, and we're going to go over three differences between majaz and between haqiqah and between literal. Okay, so there are differences between haqiqah and literal, and between majaz and figurative or metaphorical. And so we're going to talk about those three differences, inshallah. But for now, no. And so for now, when we're talking about what's important is to understand that tashbih and isti'ara are both based on the same alaqa, and that alaqa is one of mushabaha. However, tashbih states it outright, and so it's a haqiqah. Isti'ara assumes it, and so it's majaz. Kinaya, we'll leave that to last. Majaz mursal is another type of majaz, but majaz mursal is basically where there's majaz, but it isn't based on a relationship of alaqa, it isn't based on a alaqa, pardon me, of mushabaha, but it's based on something else that is incidental. Okay, and so this relationship, or this fundamental difference between a relationship that is based on mushabaha, on analogy, on comparison, and a relationship that is based on contiguity, are basically the two poles in English of figurative language. So mushabaha, or this relationship of comparison or analogy, on the one hand, is about comparing unlike things. Zayd is not like a lion, and we're establishing a new relationship there. Zayd is Zaid is a lion. We're comparing two things that aren't otherwise comparable. We're establishing that new relationship, and the relationship is mushabaha. That's the only type of relationship that we can establish. In the isti'ara, it's kind of a hybrid because it's also based on that same relationship, but we don't establish it, but rather assume it, okay? In majaz mursal, we're not establishing any relationship. The relationship already exists, but it's not a relationship of something being analogous to something else. Rather, it is a relationship of contiguity. Okay, the relationship of the intended of the uttered words to the intended meaning in majaz mursal is one of them occupying the same space or the same domain under some different condition, right? And so it can be something like for example, something like وَمَنْ قَتَلَ مُؤْمِنًا خَطَأً فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ, right? So the raqaba here is a majaz mursal. Why? We're not, what do we mean by raqaba mu'mina? We don't actually mean like a believing neck, right? What's meant is a believing slave, right? And so the raqaba is one part that is used to refer to the whole. It's like if I tell you, for example, want to check out my new wheels, meaning my car, right? And so when we use a part, and this is only one type of majaz mursal, there are many types, and we're going to go through that, inshallah. And so when you use a part to refer to the whole, that's a relationship that already exists, okay? It already exists. You didn't establish that relationship, but rather you used that relationship in an unusual way, and because of that, you didn't compare two things, but you used one word or expression to mean another because of a relationship that is between them, a relationship of contiguity, like a relationship that doesn't have to do with one being derived from the other, but rather them happening, that one being, one being compared to the other. No, they're not actually comparable. But rather the relationship already exists between the uttered words and the intended meaning in terms of time, in terms of place, in terms of cause and effect, in terms of what might have been, in terms of what might be, etc. Okay, and so there already is that relationship in the case of other types of majaz. So in both types of majaz, whether we're talking about whether we're talking about isti'ara or whether we're talking about majaz mursal, that relationship already existed. But in the case of isti'ara, the relationship is one of comparison. In the case of majaz mursal, it's not two things that are being compared, but rather two things that there is a relationship between the uttered words and the intended meaning that occupy some other kind of relationship in space, time, cause and effect, etc., etc. But it isn't a relationship of comparison. It's just like, for example, if I say, for example, what would be an example of a majaz mursal? وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ رِزْقًا. Right? So what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala referring to in this case? Right? The actual example, the actual rizq there is being used in place of water, right? And so that is an effect in terms of the relationship that already exists. The relationship that already exists is that what Allah sends down from the skies does cause rizq, which is food, which is in its most primary form, food, i.e. crops to grow, right? Or even herbage that animals eat, and then we eat the herbage and we eat the animals. And so what you have in a case of majaz mursal is that the relationship is already there, right? There already is a relationship between what Allah sends down from heavens and rizq. That relationship already exists. It's a relationship of cause and effect, right? So we're not establishing that, but we're building upon it, right? And similarly, so that relationship already exists, right? In the case of وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا, this is an example of isti'ara. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is comparing his religion to a habl, and also comparing his religion subhanahu wa ta'ala to a sirat, to a straight path, right? And so so in these cases where Allah compares the idea of the religion being compared to a habl is not established in this ayah. It's assumed, right? It's assumed. So it's not established. So the alaqa here is mushabaha. The deen is like a habl. The deen is like a sirat, right? But the relationship here is assumed and not established. And similarly, in the example of the majaz mursal fatahriru raqaba, the relationship exists and it is not established, right? So in both cases, the relationship is not established, and for this reason, they're both majaz, right? In the case of a tashbih, because the relationship is established, it's considered a haqiqah. Okay, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Okay, so notice that this is now. So far, we'll talk about kinaya in a little bit. So far, are you all clear?
I think all of it was clear to me, other than the rain coming down and it being the rizq coming down and being compared to rain. Why was that a majaz mursal instead of being a isti'ara?
No. Okay. So what is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends down from the sky? Is it being compared to rizq? Or what is its relationship? What is the relationship between rizq and what Allah sends down from the sky? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what are the uttered words? The uttered words are that Allah sends down from the sky rizq. Okay. What is the relationship between what is uttered here, the rizq, and what is meant? So what is meant? What actually comes down from the sky?
Rain.
Rain. Okay, so that's what's meant. Is rizq being compared to rain, or is rain being compared to rizq?
No, rain is one of the rizq. Rain is basically its equivalent to rizq. Like it leads
It's a type of rizq, of course, but it also leads to rizq.
Yeah.
Okay, so therefore the relationship is not one of comparison. We're not comparing rizq to rain, and we're not comparing rain to rizq, right? That is not the relationship between them. And so therefore, if we imagine, so in English literature and figurative speech, there are basically two poles of understanding. You either compare unlike things, okay, or you take a relationship that already exists that does not compare them, okay, but a relationship, some other type of relationship that already exists and is not a comparison. So so they're already alike in this way, okay, and you draw them together in that through that. Okay, so in this case, وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ رِزْقًا, the rizq is not being compared to rain, nor is rain being compared to rizq. So we're not establishing a new relationship, a relationship of the intended. We're not establishing a new relationship, nor are we basing it on an assumption of a relationship of mushabaha. Okay, so the only relationship that you can establish, really, the only relationship that you can establish is one of mushabaha. And there's a whole philosophical discussion behind this, and I suggest that you read more about this if you're unconvinced. Okay, so the only relationship that you can establish in figurative language is one of comparison. So there is no relationship that has been established, nor is the relationship assumed and one of mushabaha, but rather the relationship already exists. And the relationship that already exists, I mean, I suppose you could see it as a part of the whole, but that's not really how the Arabs would have seen it. Rain as a rizq, that's definitely true. But to the initial Arab Jahili mind, rizq would be more along the lines of something that they could technically eat. Right? Eat as opposed to drink, although water is definitely rizq, and love is rizq, and knowledge is rizq, and having a good personality is rizq, and everything Allah grants us is rizq. But I mean, in this ayah, it's closer to being that what is caused by what Allah sends from down from the sky is rizq, right? So it's as if that He has sent down rizq subhanahu wa ta'ala, but rather He has sent down what causes the rizq. So the relationship is already there, and so we're not establishing relationships or assuming a relationship of mushabaha, right? But rather we are banking on an existing relationship and putting it's as if what Allah sends down from the sky, it's because it leads to rizq that it's referred to as rizq, right? And so that's a relationship that already exists. And so it's like saying, for example, if I were to say that, I didn't kill him, I only pulled the trigger, right? And so if I were to tell someone, for example, that no, it's Bob who killed you, because Bob reported that you committed grand treason, for example, right? And so when I say that it's Bob who killed you, so what I'm talking, there would be two types of majaz there. One, it would be bi'tibar ma sayakun, right? Because I tell him Bob, it's Bob who killed you right before I shoot him, right? So he's not yet dead. So, but I'm speaking of so that's another type of majaz mursal. I'tibar ma sayakun. That would be another type of relationship, and we'll talk about the different types of relationships of majaz mursal when we get there. But it's also a type of majaz mursal because I'm saying it's Bob's deed that led to this predicament that you're in, because Bob said that you had committed grand treason, right? Yeah. So you'd have the i'tibar ما سيكون and مسببية here as well, right? As the asbab of the or as the alaqat of majaz mursal, right? And so majaz mursal is where that relationship already exists, and you're just reaching the intended meaning by mentioning it, right? By mentioning it, by drawing attention to that relationship. By drawing attention to that relationship, you're getting from the uttered meaning to the intended meaning, right? And so that relationship already exists in the case of majaz mursal, and it is not one of comparison. All good?
Yes, jazakallah khair.
Okay, well, yeah. So now let's take a look at this ayah, and I want you to focus with me on this ayah, okay? Because this ayah is considered an example of tashbih baligh, and if you understand this ayah, then you have understood that something about haqiqa and majaz here, or versus figurative and literal. Okay. So in this ayah, what do we say? We say, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إنا أرسلناك شاهدا ومبشرا ونذيرا وداعيا إلى الله بإذنه. Okay, if we look at this, إنا أرسلناك. Okay, the kaf here is a haqiqa. It's referring to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, shahidan is also a haqiqa. Okay, so we have a haqiqa which is the you or the kaf, referring to the Prophet ﷺ, and he's a shahid, he's a witness, he's a mubashir. That's also a haqiqah. He's also a nadhir. That's also a haqiqah. He actually does warn us, literally, alayhi salatu wassalam. He's also a da'iyan ila Allah bi'idhnihi. Literally, he's inviting us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? Fine. So all of that, up to wada'iyan ila Allah bi'idhnihi, has nothing to do with ilm al-bayan. All of that has nothing to do with ilm al-bayan. It's haqiqah, and it's literally true, and it has nothing to do with ilm al-bayan. Where's the bayan that comes in? وَسِرَاجًا مُنِيرًا. Okay? The Prophet ﷺ is not literally a bright lamp. He's literally, alayhi salatu wasalam, he is not a lamp, he is a person, right? But because so this, in terms of literal and figurative, this is figurative speech, right? And that's why it's a type of tashbih. But it would be considered a haqiqah in Arabic, because a tashbih is a haqiqah. Why? Because when I say the kaf, arsalnaka, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, arsalnaka, does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually mean the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, or does he mean someone else? No, he actually means the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So that's haqiqah. Okay? Now we say siraj. I ask you, what does siraj here mean? You say a lamp. And I say, okay, so the word is used in terms of its haqiqah. I used that word literally, didn't I? Didn't I use the word siraj literally? I did. I used the word literally. So what's not literal about it? Why is this considered a haqiqah in classical bayan, but it's not considered haqiqah or literally true in modern standard Arabic, or in according to some Salafis, or in English? Why is this considered a haqiqah in Arabic? Well, we already went over one reason. In Arabic, we're looking at the lexical level. Inna arsalnaka. This kaf literally refers to you, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It literally refers to him. This siraj, if I ask you, what does siraj mean? You're not going to say, oh, it means like someone who guides us. You're going to say it means a lamp. That's what, and so I say, okay, so this word here is being used literally. The word is being used literally, and the kaf is being used literally. But you'll say, okay, but the relationship between them is not literally true. Then I might tell you, okay, so first of all, let's stop making assumptions. Okay. First of all, let's stop making assumptions, and secondly, let's stop being stupid. Okay. Why? What's going on here? So when we say arsalnaka, sirajan. Okay, if we were to say arsalahu Allahu sirajan, okay, when we say that, we're mentioning, first of all, the relationship. Let's say we said the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is, if we were to say Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sirajun munirun, okay, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sirajun munirun, okay, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we mean that as a haqiqah. Or we'll say, to get around that, we'd say, Muhammadun alayhi salatu wasalam, sirajun munir. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when we say that, we mean that haqiqah, we actually mean the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And when we say siraj, we actually mean a lamp. Where is the problem? Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is being used literally. Siraj is being used literally. Where is the non-literal aspect? You say the predication. You're saying that he is a lamp. But let me ask you something. By Allah, do those words iza exist in the Arabic? They do not. Right? When we say, first of all, so we cannot take our assumptions about translation and then insist that the Arabic language follow them. Right? And so this type of, so when you have a nominal predication, when you have a jumla ismiya in Arabic, the relationship is often one of description. It can be a relationship of description, Zaydun Shuja'un. It can be a relationship of identity, right? Zaydun huwa Elqabbany. Who do you mean by Zayd? I thought we were going to make this Qabbani guy. Zayd, he's the Qabbani, right? So it can be so the relationship of nominal predication of a jumla ismiya of the mubtada to the khabar. It can be and is a relationship. It can be, but that is a relationship can be of two types. It can be in terms of a description, like Zaydun shuja'un, right? It can be and is a relationship in terms of identity, right? Like when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "Huwa al-hillu ma'u," right? Where the mubtada and the khabar are both ma'rifa. It can be a question of identity. And it can also be a description of an establishment of a new relationship. And now, so you might say, well, if it's an establishment of a new relationship, that seems pretty much like a prescription. And so if it's a prescription, that would mean that it is not a khabar, but an insha, and so therefore it's not open to being true or false. And some ulama did say that, but really, I mean, it's a prescription. It's a prescription that can be falsified. So you can say, for example, if I say Zayd is a lion, you might say, no, he's not a lion. But that's the second part of this, is that don't be stupid. When Arabs say that Zayd is a Zaydun Asadun, the whole point of a metaphor, the whole point of tashbih, and why this relationship of mushabaha is so emphasized, both in classical Arabic bayan as well as in classical Greek and English figurative language, this relationship of analogy or comparison is fundamental. This relationship is utterly fundamental and is mentioned in their books. And what they basically say is that a metaphor is establishing a relationship between two things that are different. That's the whole point of what a metaphor, what a tashbih, what an isti'ara is. They're both based on a comparison of two things that are essentially different. The difference between an isti'ara and a tashbih is that the tashbih establishes it, the isti'ara assumes it, and so goes even further. Okay, so in the case of a metaphor, in the case of an analogy, in the case of a tashbih or an isti'ara, what we have is this comparison of two different things. That is a fundamental concept that everyone who uses figurative speech is aware of, and so therefore it's clear that that because we mentioned the two endpoints, the tenor and the vehicle, i.e. the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Muhammadun sallallahu alaihi wasallam, siraj. Okay, the mushabbah is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The mushabbah bihi is the siraj. Okay, and so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala compares the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to a siraj, we're already mentioning two endpoints. It's immediately clear that this is a tashbih, and it is a relationship between two differing things. And because it's a relationship between two differing things, then there is no room. It's as if because there's it's a relationship between two differing things or two different things. The adat tashbih or the comparison operator is implicit. Right, and so when we say that, it would be like saying, "An-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam kas-siraj al-munir." Right, the kaf there is implicit. Right, and so the way that predication works in Arabic is different. There is no nominal predication in English or Greek. Right, English and ancient Greek and even modern Greek, they don't have a nominal predication. And so nominal predication it's not specific to Arabic. There are other languages that have nominal predication, but here the relationship between two things of different classes, the comparison between two things that are different, means that we can means that this is it's clear in the mind of the listener, and so therefore this is considered literal truth, because I'm saying it's as if when I say Zaydun Asadun or An-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam Sirajun Munir, it's as if I'm saying there. Look, I'm establishing a comparison here. Okay, this is the comparison that I'm establishing, and I mean the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the historical figure that you know, alayhi salatu wasalam, and I mean a lamp. I actually mean both, but I'm establishing, I'm deciding to compare them. And so because you're comparing them and you're mentioning the two endpoints, which are of different classes, then it is considered literal, it is considered a haqiqah, even though it would not be literally true. Okay, so that's one of the differences between, or two of the differences between haqiqah and majaz, is that, I guess we could summarize them into one. That between haqiqah and literal truth. Haqiqah in English is concerned with whether the entire sentence is literally true, right? Literalism in English is concerned with whether the entire sentence is literally true. In Arabic, the first difference is we're looking at the actual meanings of the words, okay? Why? Because the predication, and that's the second related point, the predication doesn't exist. This type of predication of a noun to another noun does not exist in English and or in ancient Greek. And so therefore, this is a new type of a relationship, and that relationship is clear. And so therefore we say it's literally true because it's a comparison relationship, or a relationship of two things being analogous to one another, even though we don't state that operator up front. So in other words, to repeat, the same mubtada khabar, originally a mubtada and khabar, one could say, anta shahidun, for example, before the arsalna entered upon it. Okay, so this original mubtada and khabar is just a question of description. And similarly, the Prophet ﷺ is mubashiran, that's a description. Nadhiran, it's just a description. Da'iyan ila Allah bi'idhnihi, again a description. None of these have to do with bayan. But sirajan munira, the same kind of predication, but now this is a study of ilm al-bayan. The Prophet ﷺ is being compared to a siraj munir. We have both the tenor, or the mushabbah, which is the kaf. We have the vehicle, which is the mushabbah bihi, the siraj al-munir. And so therefore, this is considered a type of tashbih, and it is considered a haqiqah. Why? Because the words are literally true, and the predication in Arabic bears that meaning. Okay, and so those are two differences between haqiqah and literal truth. Another is that haqiqah and literal truth are different in that that when you look at haqiqah, you're not looking at whether something is, or we'll leave that to the next slide, inshallah. Okay, all clear so far? Everyone good?
I've only just come back, but I'm going to say yes, probably.
Okay, inshallah. Any questions before we move on? Okay, so now when we say yaz'aru Zaydun, Zayd roars. Again, the comparison. To the brother who asked me about وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ رِزْقًا. Okay, we agreed that was a type of majaz, right? Allah sends down rizq from the sama, and we know that, and that's a majaz mursal. And we know here that Zayd doesn't actually literally roar, right? He doesn't act, so that's also a type of majaz. But it's a type of majaz here that's based on a relationship of comparison and comparing two things. And we're going to look at a quote in an upcoming slide. Comparing two things versus banking on existing relationships between two things that are not a comparison are the two poles of figurative language, right? And so here, yaz'aru Zaydun, you see that Zayd is being compared to a lion, but it's not explicitly spelled out, right? And so therefore yaz'ar has to be majaz because Zayd didn't actually roar. When I say Zayd roared, I said Zayd is a lion. When I say Zayd is a lion, I'm establishing a relationship between Zayd and lioness. And being like a lion, right? But when I say Zayd roared, I'm not establishing that relationship. I'm assuming that relationship, but it still exists and it's one of comparison, right? And similarly with وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا and اهْدِنَا الصِّرَاطَ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ. And as for the other type of majaz, it's not based on a comparison, but rather some other relationship, anything other than comparison, because that's the only relationship that humans can come up with, right? Or so the theory goes. Comparison is how we typically is one of the two poles. The other pole of figurative speech is, okay, there's a relationship that's already there. Let's bank on it and take it further. There's a relationship other than comparison that's already there, and let's take that further and use some aspect of that to talk figuratively about something else. So examples of this would be وَمَنْ قَتَلَ مُؤْمِنًا خَطَأً فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ. So the uttered word is raqaba. What is the meaning? Abd. Okay, the word that's used is a neck. But what's the meaning? A slave. Is the relationship between the raqaba, the neck, and the slave, is that a relationship of comparison? Are slaves like necks? No, they aren't. Okay, so therefore that is not a case of, it's definitely a case of majaz. The word raqaba is not being used literally. The word, and if we look in isti'ara as well, the word yaz'ar, roar, is not being used literally. The word habl is not being used literally. The word sirat is not being used literally. We're not asking for an actual road, right? We're not asking for an actual physical road, right? Zayd didn't actually roar in raqaba. Do we actually mean raqaba literally? No. فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ. Do we actually mean that you saw the month? How do you see a month? Right? وَاسْأَلِ الْقَرْيَةِ. How do you ask a village? Right? So all of those, so what is the relationship, or what is the connection between isti'ara and majaz mursal? That they're both majaz. They're both majaz. The words aren't being used literally, as opposed to Zaydun Asad, or as opposed to Ar-Rasul alayhi salatu wassalam, Sirajul Munir. Those words are being used literally. Here, the words are not being used literally, right? But the difference is that in Yaz'aru Zayd, we're comparing Zayd to a lion. In wa'tasimu bihablillahi, we're comparing the deen of Allah to a habl, right? So Yaz'aru Zayd, Zayd is the mushabbah, and the mushabbah bihi is a lion. It's omitted. That's why this is an isti'ara. By removing one of the two, you're assuming, remember when we said that if you mention two endpoints of a comparison and they're of different classes, then you've established a new relationship? When you remove one of them, you're implicitly saying that they belong to the same class, and therefore it becomes a majaz. When I don't say Zayd roared like a lion, but just say that Zayd roared, then I've removed that comparison, right? And I have removed that comparison. And so it seems like Zayd actually did roar because he belongs to that class, right? But no, the relationship is one of comparison. And so therefore, what happens is that Zayd, it's a case of majaz because we removed one of the two endpoints. It's like wa'tasimu bihablillahi, because here we removed it's the deen of Allah is the mushabbah and the habl is the mushabbah bihi. So it's the opposite. The habl is the mushabbah bihi. It's the opposite of yaz'aru Zayd. In yaz'aru Zayd, the mushabbah bihi is a lion that's omitted. In the case of bihablillah, the mushabbah bihi is mentioned, but the mushabbah, which is deenullah, is omitted. So what's important is that when we remove one of the mushabbah or the mushabbah bihi, we're saying that the mushabbah is basically the mushabbah bihi, and so therefore it stops being literally true and it becomes a majaz. Okay? But here the relationship is comparison. Here the relationship is not comparison. فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ مُؤْمِنَةٍ. So the raqabah is a part of the believer. فَمَنْ شَهِدَ مِنْكُمُ الشَّهْرَ. What's meant here? Shahr, i.e. the hilal. Right, the hilal that causes that lets you know that it's the shahr. وَاسْأَلِ الْقَرْيَةَ أي أهل القرية. Right, and so there's a relationship of you're not actually asking the village, but what's the relationship between the village and those who live there? Well, that's where they were. Right, like if I were to say Mecca, Mecca is celebrating Eid tomorrow. I can imagine this being clipped out from what I said and then put online sometime next year. So if I say, for example, as a sample sentence, Mecca is celebrating Eid tomorrow. That's an example of majaz mursal. Why? Because Mecca is a city. It's not literally celebrating Eid tomorrow. But what's the relationship between Mecca and its people? It's not a relationship of comparison. It's a relationship of where those people are. Right? Okay, so that would be the example of majaz mursal. Okay, and then Zaydun kathirur ramad. That's an example of kinaya. What is kinaya? Okay, kinaya is also considered a haqiqa, and I'm going to talk a little bit about later on, inshallah, why I don't hold that view. So the strongest view is that it's considered a type of haqiqa. And why is it considered a type of haqiqa? Because the general statement is that if you take a kinaya, it can be true. There's nothing preventing it from being true, although regardless of whether it's true or not, it's not what is intended. Okay, and so you might ask, well, what is the relationship in the case of kinaya? What is the alaqa between the uttered words and the intended meaning? And we'll get to that, inshallah. The relationships in the case of majaz mursal are many. There's sababiyya, musababiyya, mahalliyya, haliyya. There are a whole bunch of relationships, and we'll get to them, inshallah. But in general, the relationship is not one of analogy or comparison. It's not mushabah. Okay. In the case of Zaydun kathirur ramad, Zayd has a lot of ashes. Okay, what that's meant to, what that is intended to impart is that Zayd is very generous, because when people were very generous, pardon me, when people were very generous, it meant that they would chop a lot of, they would get a lot of wood, they would cook a lot of food, invite people over, and so having a lot of ashes was used as a kinaya. Or one could say, I don't believe that there is actually a proper translation of kinaya. It's close to an idiom, it's close to euphemisms, it's close to a number of things in English, but it's a category on its own in Arabic. And so the kinaya is when you say something, according to the textbook, which is what we're going to take for now, the textbook definition, the mainstream definition, it's when you say something that can be literally true, but that's not what you mean, okay? And so what are we talking about? So when we say that Zayd has a lot of ashes, Zaydun kathirur ramad, or if I tell you Professor Jones, you ask me, how are Professor Jones's exams? And I tell you, Professor Jones takes no prisoners. Literally, Professor Jones takes no prisoners. Can it be true? Yes, and it likely is true. Literally, Zaydun kathirur ramad. Literally, can it be true? Yes, but it's unlikely to be true. So that's why these are considered haqiqa in terms of ilm al-bayan. Because in addition to the alaqa, okay, there's something you have to ask: is there a qarina? Is there circumstantial evidence, or is there evidence in the statement that prevents us from taking it literally true? And if there is not, then it's considered haqiqa. How is this different from literal truth? Literal truth doesn't ask, could this be possible? Literal truth asks, is this reality? Right? So the haqiqah, another difference between haqiqah and literal truth is that haqiqah is about what is, haqiqah is about, is there a qarina that prevents it from being understood? Is there evidence, which is usually a statement or something in its meaning, that indicates that this cannot be literally true? If there is no such qarina, then it's considered a haqiqah. So when I say Professor Jones takes no prisoners, or Zaydun kathirur ramad, both could literally be true, although one is very likely and one is very unlikely in this day and age, unless they're out at a campsite or something, right? But they could be literally true. And because there's no qarina, there is no evidence that prevents the literal meaning, right? They are considered a haqiqah. And that's another difference between, between haqiqah and literal truth. Literal truth is concerned with reality or the speaker's perception of reality, notwithstanding lies. Haqiqah is about whether this could be literally true or not. And so when I say Zayd kathirul ramad, right, it could literally be true, right? When I tell you Bob kicked the bucket, does everyone know what kick the bucket means?
Yeah.
Okay, so Bob kicked the bucket could literally be true. He could have kicked the bucket. He could have, right? It's unlikely, but nonetheless, it's not. There's nothing that prevents it at the linguistic level from being true. He could have kicked the bucket, slipped, and died, right? And that's probably where that idiom comes from. But whether it's literally true or not is one issue, and whether it's a haqiqah is another issue. It's considered a haqiqah because, again, this is one of the major differences between classical bayan and between modern, literary studies, in that classical bayan is concerned with whether it could be true, right? And classical ilm al-bayan, is concerned with the lexical level. It's looking at the meanings of the words, right? So when I say Bob kicked the bucket, or Zaydun kathirur ramad, or Professor Jones takes no prisoners, every single word there is used to mean what it literally means. You might say, but the whole sentence. Okay, but that's one of the major differences between haqiqah and literal truth. Zaydun kathirur ramad. Is there a single word in there? I challenge you to give me a single word in there that is not being used literally. But it's the implication. Okay, but that's a difference between the study of haqiqah in classical bayan and the understanding of haqiqah in modern standard Arabic and literal truth in English. Okay, type. So Elias asks, so literal truth is about the actuality of a relationship. So a literal truth, you just ask yourself, is this actually the case? That's literal truth. And that's haqiqah in modern standard Arabic. Okay? But when we say haqiqah in ilm al-bayan, it's a question of, is there any word that's not being used literally, is the question. Is there any word that's not being used literally? That's the question. So when I say Zayd has a lot of ashes, I meant every single word of those literally, but the implication is different, right? And that's why haqiqah is even a discussion in the case of figurative language, because none of this, not tashbih, not isti'ara, not kinayah, not majaz, is literal in English. None of them are literal. And the difference between literal and haqiqah, you can see in this ayah up here. Shahidan, that's a haqiqah and it's literal. Okay? Mubashiran, haqiqah and literal. Nadhiran, haqiqah and literal. Da'iyan ilallah, haqiqah and literal. Sirajan munira, it's a haqiqah, but it's not literal. Okay? And so similarly, Zaydun kathirul ramad, Zayd has a lot of ashes. The relationship, the relationship between the uttered words and the intended meaning, we have to look into, and we will, inshallah. but every single word there is meant literally. So one of the major differences between haqiqa and between literal haqiqa in bayan and between literality is the question of the lexical versus the semantic level, or the lexical versus the syntactic level, even, right? So so in the case of bayan, we're talking about the meanings of the words. We're talking about the meanings of the words. So Zayd, Kathir, Ramad, every word there is. So it's a haqiqa, right? And there is no qarina that's preventing its actual literal meaning. None. Okay, all good so far? So that's a summary of, and then we're basically mainly going to do slides that explain what I just talked about. So everyone ready to go on? Anyone not ready? Have any outstanding questions? Okay, let's move forward. Okay, so now, what is about the book? The book is Asalib al-Bayan. We're going to only be doing al-Bab al-Thani, which is Ilm al-Bayan. From the printing that I have, it's from page 211 to page 350. The author is Dr. Fadl Abbas, rahimahullah ta'ala. He was he graduated with his PhD from Azhar in 1972. He was a professor at the Jordan University, University of Yarmouk, rahimahullah ta'ala, and he has an excellent book on Jaz al-Quran. So why are we studying this, and why are we not studying a method? Because you know, there's that meme. I've never seen the movie. I've just seen it. You know, where a young man yells out, "I want the truth," and then the older officer, I think it's like during a military tribunal by the looks of it, and then the older officer says, "You can't handle the truth," right? So so why not teach a method? Because you can't yet handle the truth, right? The method is the truth, right? A few good men. Okay, thank you for that. So whoever knew that I would get movie recommendations for my students. Okay, tell you. So so thank you for that. So in the case of when we're looking at the mutun are the truth. Okay, they are what you should be studying, right? But you can't handle it yet because there are so many misunderstandings. You're talking about people who study balagha in the past had already had a good amount of introduction to the theory of language, to set theory, to Greek philosophy, to Persian thought, and because of that, they had understandings. Like, for example, the understanding of predication in Arabic and how comparison between two unlike things is basically the whole point of a metaphor. And is considered the hallmark of a metaphor, is something that may not have been familiar to most of you before today. And to find that spelled out in a book, in one of the classical mutun, would be difficult. And so because of our divorce from classical classical logic and classical set theory and classical philosophy and classical literary theory, we need something that bridges the gap for us. If you've understood the mutun and you don't if you've really understood the mutun, then I would claim that you don't need such a book. But this book actually bridges the gap for you in order for you to be able to understand those upcoming mutun, in that it explains things from a modern perspective. Like, for example, he'll say, well, you know, such and such a thing is called jamid, or it's called mushtaq. How can it be mushtaq when it's actually jamid, right? The sort of thing you don't find in the older books, except if you go through, you know, a number of glosses and lengthy commentaries. And so the reason why we're studying this book is because it is a book that will bridge our understanding towards understanding the mutun. So I want to get you to the point where you can handle the truth. Right? So the truth is the mutun, no doubt about that. But this is in order for you to be able to understand those mutun. No. Now, someone asked if I ever met Dr. Fadl Abbas. No, unfortunately, I came to Jordan after he had passed away. I have an ijaza in this book from my wife. So interesting. Alhamdulillah. So about the course technicalities. So we're going to meet every 8:30 every Friday, 8:30 p.m. Mecca time. There's a Telegram group. If you're not on it, then write to me on Telegram. My ID is at Elqabbany. Course habits, same as my other courses. So basically, someone once said that two courses by the same instructor are more alike than the same course by two different instructors. And so the idea is I want you to think deeply about simple concepts. I want you to memorize the examples and understand them. And I want you to read above and beyond what's expected of you before and after class, right? So I'll tell you a story which some of you may have heard. I once spent like 4 to 5 hours, it's embarrassing, on one page of Darwish's i'rab of the Quran, because I realized that there, I suspected that there was an error, but I needed to clear, or there was a conflict in two different. He listed two different i'rabs, two incompatible i'rabs for the same ayah, and the incompatibility was something I wanted to be sure of. So I read for about 4 to 5 hours. And then I went and spoke to Sheikh Ali Hani the next morning for 3 to 4 minutes, and I benefited enormously because I had read for 4 to 5 hours. So you need to prepare yourself, ask questions, but before you ask a question, read so that you can see where your problematic areas are, and maybe you can defend or explain your lack of understanding a bit more. The question of reading before is not that you become your own teacher, but rather that you're able to ask intelligently and then possibly understand the answer, right? And so you should read above and beyond what's expected of you before and after class, type, and look up YouTube videos and what have you. Type. So let's talk a little bit about balagh al-fasaha. And we're not going to dwell on it too much, but we're going to just mention these things in a general idea. And if you memorize these two ayahs and understand their meaning, you understand the idea of the difference between balagha and fasaha. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, على لسان موسى عليه السلام, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وأخي هارون هو أفصح مني لسانا, that my brother Harun is more eloquent in tongue than I. Now, and so fasaha has to do with the or eloquence, possibly. I mean, one possible definition of it has to do with the actual words themselves, whether the words are easy to pronounce, easy on the heart, easy on the ears. And not considered, vulgar words or too basic or too difficult, right? So that's fasaha, right? So it has to do with the lisan. It has to do with the actual words, the writing. So the pronunciation or the writing of actual words. And as for balagha doesn't have to do with the tongue so much and the ears. So you could say that fasaha has to do with the tongue, the ears, and the eyes, if you include reading, right? Balagha fasaha would have to do with those. But look at this next ayah that talks about balagha, or uses the sifa from balagha, which is baligh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقُلْ لَهُمْ فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ قَوْلًا بَلِيغًا. Here, where is the domain of balagha? The domain of the balagha is in the nafs, right? It's in the soul. It's in the heart. However you want to translate nafs. Nafs is a very difficult word to translate. Okay, so the balagh, what is baligh, reaches the nafs. And if you think about this, the literal meaning of fusha al-laban would be after, how when you milk an animal, at first the milk is frothy, right? When that froth disappears, that's called fusha. So it's when something becomes clear, right? That's fasaha, right? As for balagha, Balagha is about reaching, right? To reach a place. And so when you reach that person's soul, when you reach that person's heart, when you win their mind, their heart and mind, okay, that is kalam baligh. And so that's the fundamental difference between balagha and fasaha, right? Now, balagha emerged as from the need to understand the inimitability of the Quran. And many of these terms like balagha, fasaha, bayan, badi', a lot of these terms before Jurjani were used interchangeably. After Jurjani, these words became clear. And so balagha consists of three disciplines. It consists of badi', and badi' is basically embellishment. So Omar Anwar says, Coleridge on poetry, the best words in the best order. Okay, so the order is nazm. That's what Jurjani called nazm, and that's ma'ani. Okay, so you have ma'ani there, but you don't have bayan in this. So Coleridge's expression, the best words, includes fasaha. It includes ma'ani, because that's the best order, right? But it does not seem to, unless there's something implicit here, it doesn't seem to include bayan. It doesn't include bayan, and it doesn't does it include badi'? Possibly, because badi' includes embellishments, but those embellishments. No, this is definitely basically just Coleridge's expression. It seems to be limited if we want to compare it to balagha as a whole. And I'm not criticizing Coleridge; I love him. But Coleridge's expression is talking about fasaha, and is talking about nazm, what Jurjani called nazm, which is actually ilm al-ma'ani. Okay, so bayan, he's not really mentioning it there, and badi', not really either. So badi' is basically the study of embellishment, whether that embellishment is literal, whether that is based on literary devices or otherwise. Ma'ani is basically the study of applied grammar, and bayan is figurative speech. So what is the relationship between ma'ani and bayan, right? The relationship between ma'ani and bayan is that ma'ani basically, so ma'ani is a two-step process. And this is also why, this is a couple things about ma'ani being a two-step process. So what is ma'ani, or what is Abdul Qahir al-Jurjani, what is this thing, nazm, that he defined, which later emerged into the study of ma'ani? Nazm, he said, is tatabbu' ma'ani nahu, or tawakhi, sorry, pardon me, tawakhi ma'ani nahu, right? And so nazm is to follow the meanings of syntax, okay? To follow up on the meanings, or to pursue the meanings of syntax. Pursue them how? Through uttered speech. And this is another reason why it's really critical for us to understand, to take some primers, or some modern primers, before delving into this. What on earth did Jurjani mean when he's saying that you take the rules of syntax, or you pursue the meanings of syntactic expressions? Well, to Jurjani, because he was an Ash'ari, speech existed in two forms. The first form of speech is your internal dialogue or monologue, or whatever it's called, your internal speech. Okay, and that kalam nafsi is where the ma'ani exist. And so because so what you want to do is to take your speech, which you utter, right? Not your internal speech, but your uttered speech, and to apply grammar such that your uttered speech matches your internal dialogue. Okay, and so that's what ma'ani is about. That is basically applied grammar. It's the difference. So there are two steps to it. The first is establishing your internal monologue or your internal ma'ani, your internal intended meanings, and then expressing them in the most perfect grammatical way, such that they reflect what you're thinking. So it's the study of how things like Zaydun qa'imun is different than inna Zaydan qa'imun, which is different than inna Zaydan laqa'imun, which is different than kana Zaydun qa'iman, right? And is also different from inna Zaydan laqa'imun, right? And so all of those studies of how you apply grammar and all those things that in grammar, where they say, this is harf za'id. It's no longer za'id when it comes to ma'ani, right? So it's only za'id with respect to nahu. And so for ma'ani, I prefer that before teaching it, that someone has completed qatr al-nada or something similar in level, and has a lot of experience thinking about i'rab and the different awjuh of i'rab. So ma'ani is two steps. It's establish your internal speech, and then choose the grammatical constructs that perfectly represent or that best represent your internal speech, right? And why do we need we need to understand at least a little bit about classical aqeedah and classical philosophy to understand this, because that concept seems very remote to someone who hasn't studied these things, but it's very clear from an Ash'ari perspective, because from an Ash'ari perspective, and Jurjani was an Ash'ari, the kalam nafsi always precedes the actual kalam mamtuq, right? Or the internal dialogue precedes what is reflected, or what is reflected on the what appears on the tongue is a reflection of one's internal dialogue, right? Okay, and so that's the study of ma'ani. And so so ma'ani is basically how you present your ideas best, right? But bayan is real. So ma'ani is an appeal to the mind in general. It's an oversimplification. Bayan is an appeal to the heart. Bayan is interesting because bayan means clarifying things, right? But it's actually, it's like a tawdih or a kashf. It's a bayan is a depiction, a clarification, an illustration, and all of this is about non-literal language. So the idea is that to clarify something, to really win over someone, you have to explain things sometimes non-literally. And so that's an amazing thing, that bayan, which is to elucidate, which is to express something in a clearer way, is to say it non-literally. And the example that probably many of you have heard of is, let's say we're talking about Khabib, the fighter, and I were to say Khabib is an animal, and I were to say this praise, right? Every man understands what that means, and that means a lot more than saying everything that I wanted to say literally. Because Khabib is an animal, immediately you understand. You don't fight this guy. This guy is, there is no logical reason when he fights. He's strong. He's vicious. He'll hurt you. And a whole slew of meanings is expressed much more immediately, and much more, and actually the exaggeration of it puts the meaning into the person's heart much stronger than if I were to say everything that was literally true about Khabib in the ring, right? So saying Khabib is an animal is a type of bayan, because what we're doing is we are elucidating or clarifying and illustrating the meaning in a way that would not be possible literally. And why is it important to understand ilm al-balagha and ilm al-bayan in particular? Because it's a matter of survival. Because those who have no narrative have no believers. If you don't have a story, you don't have a believer. And if there's, among the trivium, if we look at, logic, logic, grammar, and rhetoric, logic and grammar have basically been done away with. Logic, because postmodernism indicates that there is no actual objective truth, but that everything is actually a matter of perspective. And so one could be, according to postmodern understanding, a Hindu Muslim, right? They don't believe in the law of non-contradiction. Right, so they've done away with logic. Grammar, I mean, people have changed their pronouns. They've changed the grammar here means something that also includes definitions. They've changed the definitions of man and woman. What they're very good at is rhetoric, or a certain application of rhetoric, which is a narrative. You feel guilty talking about talking against homosexuality when it's placed under the rubric or the narrative of human rights. They'll show you a story about this poor gay dude that was like oppressed and whatever, and all sorts of terrible things happened to him. Why? It's a question of application of rhetoric. They're very good at defining their own narrative. We have to speak our own narrative. We must stop speaking in their language. We must, you could say in a sense that rhetoric is about establishing the rules of the, is about establishing the frame. The rules of the game include logic and grammar, but they've been done away with. But we can give our own rhetoric and our own and talk about things from our own perspective and why these things. And so, if you don't have a story, if you don't have a narrative, if you don't have rhetoric, then you have no believers, you have no followers. And so knowing rhetoric just for ourselves and for the preservation of our faith and explaining our faith to other Muslims before we even explain it to non-Muslims is a matter of survival. Now, and so Bayan is actually the study of saying the same thing in different ways. Okay. Okay, so there's a typo in the ayah, astaghfirullah, لتبين. نعم للناس. نعم, I'll fix that before sending it out. And then there's a hadith. I'm not aware of the hadith's authenticity, but it's not موضوع, it's not a fabrication. إن من البيان إلى السحر, that among bayan or exposition is a type of magic, right? There's a type of sorcery, right? Because bayan can be so the way that, and so the word bayan in this hadith obviously doesn't mean the discipline as we know it, but exposing ideas and illustrating ideas can be a type of magic, and that's exactly what has happened to people around the world. We have been mystified, we've been gobsmacked, we have been, whatever the right word for is, we've been put under the spell of their bayan. And it's about time that we learn to tell our own story. Right. Now let's talk about this qarina and alaqa. So we said that basically between these, and this particular excerpt is from Asrar al-Balagha by Ahmed al-Hashmi, Sayyid Ahmed al-Hashmi. Okay, so here he says basically here we're talking about qarina and alaqa. There, for every type of figurative device, okay, there is the alaqa, or the relationship that maps from what was literally said, or what was, the words that were uttered, to the imparted meaning. And then in some cases, in two cases, in the majazi cases, there's a qarina, or there's circumstantial evidence, or there's evidence that indicates why it cannot be taken literally true. And so what does he say here? He says, now, before we even get there, there's a different kind of majaz that's called majaz aqli. And majaz aqli isn't really an area of study of bayan, but we'll mention it in passing. So majaz aqli is when you associate the verb subject isn't actually literally its subject, right? And so you're associating that verb to something else. Like, for example, if I were to say bana al-amirul madina, right? The prince built the city, right? So in that case, pardon me, my lessons are often between 1.5 to 2 hours long. So when we say bana al-amir al-madina, the emir built the city, okay? In that case, did the emir actually build the city himself? No, he didn't. He commanded that it be built. And so that's called majaz aqli. That's when the subject of a verb is not is not literally its subject, and so that's called majaz aqli. The majaz that we're interested in terms of ilm al-bayan is what's called majaz lughawi. And what you notice is that metaphorical speech in English includes both of those, right? But when we talk about majaz lughawi, then because bayan is only concerned with majaz lughawi, okay, its haqiqa is the opposite of majaz lughawi and isn't about majaz aqli. Got it? So that's where the fundamental difference comes in. So first of all, majaz aqli is a separate field from ilm al-bayan. And English, when we say literally true, or when we say haqiqa in modern standard Arabic, we include that we mean that it cannot have majaz aqli either. Okay, so what we're talking about is majaz lughawi, and this word lugha, you have to stop thinking of it as language and start thinking of it as lexically and in terms of usage, because that's the technical meaning here. If you gain anything, understand what lugha means in different contexts. In this context, the books of lugha are dictionaries and words about Arabic usage, like what different Arabic expressions mean and when you can use this expression and what the difference between this and this other similar expression. It all has to do with definitions and usage. That's what lugha means. And so majaz lughawi, so the first type of majaz is majaz aqli. If the verb has its actual subject, okay, then we look at the type of relationship that's there. Or sorry, then we look at is there a qarina that prevents the lughawi literal meaning, the lughawi haqiqa meaning of this? And so you could think of haqiqa as being lexically literal, okay, and maybe to a certain degree also syntactically literal, but not semantically literal. Okay, so I guess we could say haqiqa is lexically and syntactically literal, but not necessarily semantically literal. Okay, so why do I say lexically? The meanings of the words are right. Why do I say syntactically? Because we ascribed the verb to who we actually meant as its fa'il, right? So that would include both, and so that would be a haqiqa, right? So if there's a qarina that prevents it from being syntactically true, then that's a majaz aqli, and we're not interested in that in this discipline. That's majaz aqli, okay? Like bana al-amir al-Madina. Literally, the amir, we mean the word build, we mean it literally, or built, we mean it literally. The word prince, we mean it literally, okay? But the isnad of the verb to its subject, the attribution or the ascription of the verb to its subject is a majaz, and so therefore that's called majaz aqli, right? And if the ascription of the verb is to its actual subject, and there isn't that syntactic metaphor, okay, then we ask ourselves, okay, is the meaning of each word here literally true? If there is there something that prevents us from understanding this as being literally true? Is there from understanding the words as being literally true? Is there anything that's stopping us from understanding the words as being literally true? If so, then it's a type of majaz lughawi, or we could say lexical majaz, or lexical figurative speech. Okay, in which case it's either an isti'ara if the relationship is mushabaha, or it is majaz mursal if the relationship is anything other than mushabaha. Okay, but if it's literally true, then we ask ourselves again: if all the words are literally true, not the sentence, but the words. If the words are literally true, then you ask yourself: is the relationship mushabaha then in that case it's tashbih, and if not, then it's kinaya. Okay, so there are two questions that you need to ask yourself. You need to ask yourself, and you can ask them in either order, okay? But you need to ask yourself, is the alaqa, is the relationship mushabaha? And I suggest that you start with this one, okay? You start with this one, it's better, because if you ask yourself, is it literally true? You might forget to ask yourself, is it lexically literally true? Because that's all we're concerned with. Okay, we're not concerned with syntactic, because that would take us into the realm of majaz aqli, not majaz lughawi, and we're not concerned with semantic, and that would take us into the domain of modern literary criticism and modern literary studies. Okay, so we're concerned with at the lexical level. So ask yourself: is the alaqa mushabaha? Is there a comparison? Take the words that have been uttered. Take the intended meaning. What's the relationship between them? Is it mushabaha? Is there a comparison? Yes. Then it is either isti'ara or tashbih. If it's not comparison, if it is, are the words being used lexically, literally true? If yes, then it's tashbih. Otherwise, it's isti'ara. In the case of it not being a mushabaha, then you ask yourself. So it's some other type of relationship other than mushabaha. Is the intended meaning, can it be literally true? Is there any qarina that's stopping it from being literally true at a lexical level, at the meanings of the for the sake of the meanings of the words, right? And if that's the case, then in that case it's a kinaya. Even if you don't intend what was literally said, could it be literally true? Is it at the lexical level? When I say Zayd has a lot of ashes, okay, there is nothing there that was intended as unintentional. There is no single word that was used to mean something else. There was no single word, but rather it's the whole idea that was used to mean something else. Okay, so when I say that Zayd is kathir al-ramad, okay, we're using every single word literally. So if the relationship is not mushabaha, then if it can be literally true, if it's a haqiqa lughawiyya, if it is a haqiqa at the lexical level, then it's a kinaya. Otherwise, it is majaz mursal. So you need to ask yourself those two questions: is there a qarina that prevents it from being qarina leads to two outcomes, alaqa leads to two outcomes, so you have a total of four. Okay, let's see this drawn out. Let's talk about this a little bit more, and then we'll look at this in terms of images. Actually, let's take a look at this image right here. Okay, 4 devices, 2 questions. Okay, so you can see that you ask yourself: is it a majaz or a haqiqa? Is the relationship mushabaha or other than mushabaha? So if it is if the relationship is a comparison and it's majaz, meaning that a word or more was not used literally, then it is isti'ara. If a word or more was not used literally, and the relationship is not mushabah, is not comparison, then it's majaz mursal. If it is if on the other hand the words are all used literally and the relationship is mushabaha between the uttered words and the intended meaning, then that's tashbih. If the words are all being used literally and the relationship is not mushabaha, then it's a kinaya. So this is a simple way of observing the 4 outcomes. Let's go back a little bit. Okay. Type. Now, so in the case of tashbih, you build the relationship. You build the alaqa, and that's a relationship of comparison between 2 distinct objects. And because of that, it's understood that you don't mean it literally true. And because you mentioned the 2 endpoints, it's understood that because they're not the same, that the way that you're using the words is literal because you've spelled that out. Okay. In isti'ara, you assume the relationship of comparison. You don't build it, and it's deeper, but that's not always better. Okay. So when you hear that something is that al-isti'ara ablaghu min at-tashbih, you shouldn't say, oh, that means that I should always use what's ablag. No, the Quran uses tashbih. Why? Because sometimes you want to establish the comparison. You want to. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informed us that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was like a bright lamp, right? sometimes in other cases, it's easy enough to understand the comparison, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to or builds upon that. And so the point of an isti'ara is that you assume the relationship so deeply that it's as if you're saying they're actually the same thing, and that's why I didn't need to mention the other endpoint, like wa'tasimu bihablillahi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not mention the deen is like a habl, but rather just mentioned the habl. And so that allows that assumption allows you to say that the deen is a habl, wow, and so therefore that's majaz because the deen isn't lexically and literally a habl, right? And so therefore it becomes it's still based on the relationship of comparison, but you don't build it, you assume it, and it goes deeper, and so therefore it's majaz. And it's a type of majaz lughawi that's called isti'ara. Majaz mursal, the relationship already exists. You don't build it, you don't assume it, the relationship already exists, okay? So these are three distinctions. Tashbih, you build the relationship. Isti'ara, and it's one of comparison. Isti'ara, you assume the relationship, and it's one of comparison. Majaz mursal, the relationship already exists, but not in that way. You just used it, that relationship, to get from A to B, to get from uttered words to the intended meaning. And so majaz mursal is an argument, right? But kinaya is a proof, and we'll talk about that. Okay, type. So why is mushabaha special? Why is mushabaha special? Why do we treat this differently? So this is a quote from Wikipedia's some page on either metaphor or metonymy. So metonymy, I'm not going to commit to metonymy being majaz mursal, but there's a lot of overlap between metonymy and majaz mursal. Synecdoche, some people consider a type of metonymy, others don't. But basically, if you just read over this, what you'll see is that he says that metaphor, or you could say tashbih and isti'ara, is distinct from metonymy, or from you could say majaz mursal. The two terms exhibit different fundamental modes of thought. Metaphor, or tashbih and isti'ara, works by bringing concepts together from different conceptual domains, whereas metonymy uses one element from a given domain to refer to another closely related element, okay? A metaphor creates new links between otherwise distinct conceptual domains, whereas a metonymy relies on pre-existent links within such domains. And you can even look up there's a paper on this, or a book called The Two Poles of Figurative Speech, right? These are the two fundamentals of figurative speech in Greek, in Greek and English literature, right? And so one of them is based on mushabaha. So this is not something that's specific to Arabic. This is something that from classical times that was known. One of them is mushabaha, comparing things, and the other is building on an existing relationship. Okay, so in Arabic, we actually distinguish three levels. If you establish the relationship, that's tashbih. If you don't establish the relationship, but nonetheless it's mushabaha, that's isti'ara. If you use an existing relationship for figurative language, then that is majaz mursal. Okay, moving forward. So if we look at this, you can we're running low on time, but inshallah this should be relatively straightforward. So if you look at the halaqa, is the halaqa literally mentioned in the speech? If so, then it's tashbih. If not, if it's understood, if the halaqa is understood but it's not literally spelled out in the speech, then the question, is the halaqa mushabaha? If so, then it's isti'ara. And both of these are in the alaqa of mushabah. Is the relationship between the uttered words and the intended meaning, is it mushabaha? No. Then in that case, you have to ask yourself, is the relationship one of luzum, or is it istilzam? Okay, and what does that mean? Kinaya. I promised to tell you what the relationship is between kinaya or what the relationship is in kinaya between the uttered and the intended meaning, or the uttered words and the intended meaning. Kinaya is when you don't try to argue something, but rather you provide proof for it. So when I say that Zaydun kathirul ramad, whether that is literally true or not, it's a haqiqah because all the words are meant literally, right? So it's lexical literally true. But when I say that, what do I mean? I'm not arguing that Zayd is Kareem. Or that Zayd is generous. I'm giving you the over-the-top result of Zayd being generous. I'm telling you the conclusion that Zayd is so generous that I don't need you to ask why. I'm going to provide you proof of why Zayd is generous. And this is similar to Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istawa. When we say Ar-Rahmanu ala al-Arsh istawa, they will say that this is a type of kinaya because the istiwa ala al-Arsh, if we just treat it like in terms of human language, coronation is proof. Like when a king is coronated, that is proof of his complete dominion, or his complete authority over his dominion, right? And so a kinaya is basically where you conclude. So it's istilzam. It's where you don't go from the malzoom to the lazim like in normal order, but rather you go from the lazim to the malzoom. You wanted to say that Zayd, you intended to say that Zayd was generous. So instead, you said something from which someone would conclude necessarily that Zayd is generous. And that's istilzam. Luzum is the opposite. You say something from which someone concludes what you want to say, right? What you want, you don't provide proof of what you want to say, but rather, like for example, when we say we want to get from rizq to matar, right? And so we would make an argument that would show that rizq actually leads to that this word rizq through a particular argument, because through the argument of being the effect of something, that it causes that what's meant is actually matar. What's meant is actually rain that causes the rizq, right? But in the case of a kinaya, you're actually mentioning the proof from which you reverse, so the implication is reversed, right? Because you're mentioning the proof, you're not mentioning an argument, but a proof, okay? So the relationship of kinaya and of majaz mursal are opposites of one another. One of them is from the malzoom to the lazim, which is the majaz mursal, and that's the normal way that you would argue things. And the other is istilzam, which is from the lazim to the malzoom. Okay, so Zayd having a lot of ashes is the result of him being Kareem. All right, all good? Moving. Okay, so differences in classifications. We're going to try to move a little bit quickly. So in English, there's a difference between a simile and a metaphor. And the difference between the simile versus metaphor is that in English, a simile contains the adat al-tashbih. So Zayd is like a lion, is a simile, and Zayd is a lion is a tashbih. In Arabic, that's not how the differences work. The differences are whether the comparison is whether the tenor and the vehicle, whether the mushabbah and the mushabbah bihi are both mentioned or not. In any case, because they don't belong to the same class, like Zayd and being a lion don't belong to the same class. Because of that, obviously, the comparison operator is assumed, right? Even if it's not mentioned explicitly. And this is why, for example, inna arsalnaka shahidan, there the Prophet ﷺ does belong to the class of those who are shuhud, right? And so there is no tashbih there to begin with, right? That's not even a discussion of bayan, that the Prophet ﷺ is a shahid. That's not a discussion of bayan. The discussion of bayan is that he is that he alayhi salatu wasalam is the siraj munir, right? And so in Arabic, it's not about the comparison operator, because the comparison operator exists implicitly even when it's not mentioned, when as long as the tenor and the vehicle are both mentioned. It's when one of the tenor or the vehicle is not mentioned, then the tenor has been included in the vehicle as a haqiqa, and that can't be meant, and so it becomes a type of majaz. Once you say that Zayd roared, or you say that, and you don't even mention Deenullah, but you rather say wa'tasimu bihablillah. Once you reach that level, and the Deen has there's an assumption there that you're already comparing them so much that you want the listener to forget about the comparison, to treat it like a haqiqa. Therefore, it becomes a majaz, because they're not a haqiqa. So therefore, it becomes a majaz. And so when the tenor or the vehicle isn't mentioned, that's when it becomes an isti'ara. So that's the difference between simile versus metaphor and tashbih versus isti'ara. Haqiqa versus literal truth. So just to summarize, haqiqa is concerned with the meanings of words, nominal and so that's one difference, right? And so haqiqa, you could say in terms of ilm al-bayan, haqiqa means that it is lexically, literally true. It is literally true from a lexical perspective, okay? From the meanings of the words. Nominal predication is something that exists in Arabic that doesn't exist in English or in Greek, and so its meaning is determined to be haqiqa because of the different classes. If we said that Zayd was a man, Zayd is a rajul, that wouldn't even be a discussion as a part of bayan, right? Figurative speech can never be literally true. But bayan, certain aspects of bayan can be a haqiqa. So that's yet another difference. Haqiqa is about what can be true. Why? Because it's talking about the lexical level, not the syntactic level. If we say that something is syntactically not literally true, is not literally the case syntactically, that's a case of majaz aqli. Okay. Not majaz lughawi. Okay, so we're talking about majaz lughawi. If we say that something is a haqiqa, it means that there's no qarina preventing it from being literally true at the lexical level. As for whether it is true or not, that's not what haqiqa is talking about, but that is what literalism is talking about. So those are the main differences between what is a haqiqa and what is literally true. Okay, fine. So everything here is figurative, and so we're going to talk about haqiqa and majaz in the slide. So another way to represent that same thing that we did before was to have basically a flow chart here. So if the speech consists of a verb whose subject didn't actually isn't its real subject, then that is called majaz aqli. Okay, like bana al-amir al-madi. Otherwise, then you ask yourself, does it have a qarina? Does it have something that prevents the lexical literal meaning, even if we have to assume the existence of a harf tashbih between a comparison operator? If yes, okay, if yes, there is something that prevents the literal meaning, even after the assumption of a adat tashbih, of a comparison operator, then you ask yourself, is the relationship between the haqiqa and the majaz, is the relationship mushabaha? If yes, then it's isti'ara, and if no, then it's majaz mursal. No, okay. Like for example, ash'al ad-dar, that the whole house lit up, meaning in terms of going or lighting up, being on fire. Now, if on the other hand that the literal that there is no qarina that stops it from being understood literally, then it's then you ask yourself, is the relationship mushabaha? If so, then it's a tashbih. Otherwise, it's a kinaya. Okay, and so we'll go through these examples later. If you want to ask about these examples, you can ask in the group. But basically, what you have here is the verb associated with someone who didn't do it, so it's majaz aqli. What you have here is a relationship So again, always ask yourself, you have two questions, each question has two possible answers, and so there are four possibilities. Is it literally true? Is it literally true? If so, yes. If it's literally true, the question asks actually, is there a qarina that stops it from being haqiqa? Is it a haqiqa? If yes, then is it mushabaha? Then it's tashbih. If no, it's kinaya. Is it a haqiqa? No. Then is the relationship mushabaha? If yes, then it's isti'ara. Otherwise, it's majaz. So you have two questions, four possibilities. We'll take a look at this. Another way of looking at it is the following, through a Venn diagram. Sorry, it looks like we're going to be a little bit over time, but not that much more, inshallah. So this whole box is a surah al-Bayaniyah, right? So if the relationship, if there's a qarina, if there's some evidence that prevents the lexical literal meaning, which is what haqiqa means, if there is something that prevents the lexical literal meaning, okay, and the alaqa is mushabaha, then this sweet spot of intersection is isti'ara, where it's both. It cannot be lexically literally true, okay, because there is no literal rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no literal road that we're asking about, sirat al-mustaqim. It's figurative, okay? So is it lexically literally true? If there is something that prevents it from being lexically literally true, and the relationship is mushabaha, then it's isti'ara. Otherwise, if the relationship is mushabaha, but every word is being used in its literal sense, then it's tashbih. If there's something that prevents it from being from the words being understood in a literal sense, then it is. But it's not. The relationship is not mushabaha, then it's majaz mursal. And in the case that it's not none of the above, then it's a kinaya. In the case of a kinaya, the relationship is not mushabaha, rather it's istilzam, as opposed to luzum. And in the relationship of a in the case of a kinaya, it's also, there's nothing that stops it from being a haqiqa in terms of its actual at its lexical level. And we're done. Okay. So any questions, inshallah, any questions before we close up? If there are involved questions, we might take them on the group. Okay. هذا وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والله تعالى أعلم وأحكم وهو حسبنا ونعم الوكيل والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.